Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Heather Allen. I am the Associate Director of the Utah County Children's Justice Center. I am covering for Kelly today. She has lined up some great presenters for us. So today we'll be learning about awareness and prevention of sexual abuse from our presenters who come from Saprea. We have Betsy Kanarowski, who is the Chief Clinical Officer, and Karen, who is the VP of Program Fulfillment, who will be speaking today. And they also have Jocelyn, who is the Officer of Global Outreach Strategies, who will be moderating the questions and comments today. Before we have them get started, I wanted to make sure to share the code word for today, which is prevention. I will go ahead and add that to the chat as well. So if you have any connection issues and you need to get back in, make sure you have that code word to email to Gabby. I will be putting her email address in the chat and she will be able to readmit you. And then please make sure that your Zoom profile has your first and last name. This makes readmitting go a little bit smoother so that she knows who you are and can let you in. And then we will be sending the link for the evaluation towards the end of the presentation today. And with that, let's go ahead and get started and I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Thanks so much, Heather. We just really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. We're grateful for the CJCs and the work that you all do. It's incredible work that is so needed in our communities, and just grateful to partner with you in sharing this training today. Thank you to everybody that's joining us. We're really excited to share this education with you. I'm going to start by just sharing a little bit about Saprea. Saprea exists to liberate individuals in society from the lasting impacts of child sexual abuse. That's our North Star. It's the reason we exist. Um, the impact can be varied from individual to family to community. And so this really drives the work that we do. Um, our mission is threefold. We are focused on healing, prevention, and awareness. So, from a healing perspective, we provide healing resources for individuals who are sexually abused as children or adolescents, and we do that with our retreats, our support groups, and other online resources. We also work to engage parents and caregivers and help them learn how to reduce risk and protect their children. And then we drive awareness to motivate individuals to take action. The work that we do is on a continuum of care, and that continuum of care we like to share, especially with this audience. You guys understand continuum of care and treatment plans. If you take a look at our continuum, we have resources on the awareness side in the different areas of prevention, from education to behavior modification and habitual behavior. You'll notice in the crisis intervention slice, we do not have resources in that slice. We are not a crisis intervention organization, but there are many people, CJCs being one of them, who do help with crisis intervention. But as someone is moving through their healing as a survivor into stabilization and ongoing trauma recovery, that's where our resources really come into play and are very powerful. Uh, I just want to share that our resources are um, developed by a team of researchers and educators who are focused on evidence-based uh, research, providing practical methods for confronting and overcoming child sexual abuse, that everything you see on our website goes through the vetting process of not just our research and education team, but our clinical team, so that you can feel comfortable using those resources and know that they're the most current research, as well as going through that trauma-informed and trauma-aware lens. Finally, about Saprea, I just want to make sure you understand that the resources Saprea offers are free. Thanks to the generosity of our founders and donors, everything that we talk about in terms of healing resources and prevention resources are all available on our website for free. And that includes our healing retreat. It's a 4-day in-person experience led by our clinical team. Starts on a Monday, ends on a Thursday. It's completely free to participants. The only responsibility they have is travel in getting to our retreat, but otherwise it's all free. And then everything else is web-based, and so you can access that through our website at saprea.org. We're really excited today to share with you the awareness and prevention of sexual abuse education. Our team has worked really hard over this last year to utilize the Utah State Board of Education's rubric to develop content that meets their criteria for training adults, employees, caregivers on awareness and prevention. So the training that we're going to present to you today has met and has been approved by the Utah
Okay,
State Board of
I just need
Education
to look how to do
to be
this.
presented to parents and caregivers. And I'm going to now turn the time over to Dr. Betsy Kanarowski. She will lead us through the first part of this training today.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen. We are going to go ahead and start by watching a brief video. And as shown in the video, a key step to confronting and reducing child sexual abuse is being willing to talk about it, which is why we're here today. And I want to acknowledge from the start that it's true that parents, community members, we can all take every precaution possible and still see our loved ones impacted by abuse. But there are a lot of things that we can do in recognizing and responding to sexual abuse. And parents and caregivers, community members, we are a first line of defense. And those of you who are involved with training other individuals, who are therapists working with parents, your willingness to be involved in fighting against this epidemic can make all the difference. So let's start just watching this video. Oh, don't want to show that again. So today we're going to talk about the following topics. What is childhood sexual abuse and what do I need to know to prevent child sexual abuse? And as we said earlier, this is kind of a two-part training because it's long. And what this training is based on is the Utah State Board of Education Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Training that has been okayed by the State Board of Education, approved for parent education. And so what you're getting is if you're interested in more, and Karen can talk about this a little bit in being trained on giving this presentation, things like that, but this is the okayed State Board of Education parent training. So I want everybody to know that this is what you can do in the schools. So starting off here, we're going to start with talking about some common myths around child sexual abuse. And these myths matter because adults can miss opportunities to prevent child sexual abuse because of misinformation or confusing stereotypes. But before we really dive into this presentation, I just want everybody to take a deep breath, acknowledge there's a lot happening in the world. Some of us are struggling with feeling kind of helpless with things going on. And today we're going to continue talking about a really difficult topic, but this is one where we have some power to make change in our community. At Saprea last year, we did focus groups with 52 adult survivors of child sexual abuse, and we explored what works in prevention and what they wish had been around to protect them as children. And one of the themes we saw in every group was the importance of education for adults. And one woman said, quote, "Education is key, but community resistance makes it difficult." And another shared that through education, we need to shift the stigma from the survivor to the abuser. And today, as you listen to this presentation, I hope we take steps in doing this and motivate you to take action in your community and be involved in education. So let's start off with this first myth. Sexual abuse only happens to girls. The truth is that abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of age, gender, race, etc. Boys and girls alike can be victims, just as women can also be perpetrators of sexual abuse. And according to recent research conducted by the Crimes Against Children Research Center, so this is 2024, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 10 boys in the United States will be sexually abused before age 18. And also, it's important for us to note that male victims often underreport being sexually abused and are significantly less likely to ever tell anyone about the abuse. And I forgot to say with questions, sorry, I was supposed to do that. If you have questions, we'll, go ahead and jot them down, and then we can go ahead and address those at the end. And this is a very long presentation. So as I said, we're splitting it in half. So I'm hoping I got my timing completely right to stop where we should on this. So I think we're just going to see. But please hold on to questions because we definitely want to have time in the end to address those. All right, myth number 2, abusers are usually strangers. So the truth of this is that in the majority of cases, a child is far less likely to be abused by a stranger than by someone they know. And I think this is an incredibly prevalent myth. We think of the stereotype of a perpetrator being that stranger in a dark alley or lurking in a van. That's rarely accurate. Sexual abuse occurs in familiar, everyday places where it's easy to be alone with a child and when there's some assurance that the abuse will not be seen or discovered or interrupted by others. And it can happen anywhere. It can happen at the kid's home, a friend's home, at school, in a car, in a bathroom, in a locker room, in areas protected from view, basically. So in short, wherever children are alone physically or virtually with an adult or an older youth, it's a potential place where they could be abused. And also, there's no specific time of day that abuse happens, though children may be more vulnerable when they're tired or asleep. And it's important that parents emphasize safety with their children. And safety is important, and we're going to be talking about this today, but it is incredibly key that we always stress it's not the child's fault if they find themselves in a place or a situation where adults abuse them. The responsibility always falls on the adult that committed the acts, and children are in no way to blame. And of course, all reports of sexual misconduct should always be taken seriously. All right, our myth number 3. Child sexual abuse is only perpetrated by adults. So research actually shows that in over half of reported cases, a child is sexually abused by another juvenile. And they may be someone who lives in the same home or the same neighborhood. It can happen with children who are the same age, but more often happens when other children are older and therefore have more power and control over the younger children. And this is something at Saprea we're really going to be working on in 2026 because most people, when they think of child sexual abuse, again, think of an adult and a child. And when I talk to people, they're often very shocked when I say, well, yeah, around half is perpetrated by another juvenile. And people are just so surprised. So we need to kind of bust this myth and get information out there. And some children who engage in this behavior have been victims of sexual abuse themselves. However, this belief that most victims go on to become abusers is another cultural myth. And this myth can be really harmful when it comes to public perceptions on child sexual abuse victims, as well as how victims may see themselves as, dirty, corrupted, or damaged. In my work at Saprea, I have spoken to a lot of people, and particularly in work with men, where they say, well, I don't want to tell anyone because then they'll think that I'm also a perpetrator. And some other factors behind youth engaging in sexually harmful behaviors may be exposure to sexually explicit material, witnessing sexual activity, or experiencing other forms of abuse. And of course, in some cases, youth is just acting impulsively with no intent of causing harm. And the sooner these behaviors are addressed, of course, the sooner they can be stopped. All right, next myth. Trafficking doesn't happen in my community. Well, the truth is trafficking happens in every community. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery in which traffickers coerce victims to engage in commercial sex acts or labor services. And these crimes include digital trafficking, such as the distribution of photographs or videos or other media of underage victims through online social networks. And this, I think, is really interesting and another piece of information that I can just not stress enough to get out there in the world. Just like other forms of child sexual abuse, the majority of sex trafficking victims are trafficked by a member of their own family, with nearly 46% trafficked by a parent or guardian. And that, I think that goes very much against the sort of narrative that we hear a lot about trafficking. These are kids being trafficked by a member of their own family. Of course, that's not all cases, obviously. The way I said that made it sound like it was all of them, but that 46%, someone of their own family. All right, so our next one, sexual abuse only includes physical contact. The truth is sexual abuse can also include non-contact abuse, which we will dive into more on our next slide. But first, just by putting a thumbs up onto the screen, how many of you were surprised by one or more of the myths or statistics or information I just gave? And of course, I can't see any of that, so I don't know if anybody was.
I'm not seeing any reactions yet,
Me
Betsy.
neither.
Oh, I can see them. There's quite a few
Oh,
actually.
okay.
I'm
Oh,
seeing a lot
good.
of
Okay.
thumbs up. Yeah.
There we
Okay,
go.
awesome. Yeah, it's so weird when I can't see the chat or the reactions. Yeah, I think some of these things, even when we work in the field, and especially working as a therapist, things like that, I remember being very surprised about the trafficking statistic. That one was one that I did not see coming with the trafficking by family members. All right. So let's talk about some definitions here. Child sexual abuse is defined as any situation where another person, so an adult or a peer, forces or coerces a child or adolescent into sexual activity, physical or non-physical. And sexual abuse includes acts or attempted acts of sexual intercourse, sodomy, incest, molestation by an adult directed towards a child. And then sexual misconduct, because we're looking at some legal terms here, includes any sexual act toward a child that is not safe or appropriate, including pictures, inappropriate jokes, or communication and other grooming behaviors. Sexual abuse and misconduct also includes acts or attempted acts by a child towards another child under certain conditions defined in the law. And in all of these instances, even if the child may not feel uncomfortable, the actions are still considered abuse or misconduct. To put it another way, abuse is always defined by the unsafe always defined by the unsafe and inappropriate behavior of the sexual act, not defined by the feelings generated in the child. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about non-contact forms of abuse facilitated through technology. So, online sexual abuse is any type of sexual harassment, exploitation, or abuse that takes place through screens. And this is a topic that we're hearing a lot more about now. Seems like there's things in the news almost every day as technology advances and more frightening um, apps and things like that come up where this can take place. So here are some examples of online child sexual abuse. And I'm just going to give everybody just a second to read through these. And so, given that technology has become such a central place of our everyday life, these forms of online abuse often occur alongside abuse taking place offline. And this is research based. This is from Finkelhor's research in 2020. And a perpetrator may initially reach out to a child online with the intent of eventually meeting in person, or they may use online communications to escalate the grooming that has already begun in person. And regardless of how a perpetrator first contacts a child, the odds are that they will try to integrate technology into the grooming process at some point. So ultimately, sorry, I thought my slides went a different order there. Yeah, so that is online. So let's talk about the community risk factors. And ultimately, it's important to be aware that child sexual abuse is still a silent epidemic within our own neighborhoods and communities. And while every community is impacted, there are certain issues within specific communities that can contribute to the prevalence of abuse or trafficking. So some of these high risk factors include, but these are not limited to, this is not an exhaustive list, but communities that are close knit or isolated, or those that have high levels of trust and low levels of supervision, ones where they have limited neighbor support for parents and caregivers, ones that have high rates of poverty and limited education, easy access to drugs and alcohol, fewer activities for children and adolescents, high unemployment rates, and high rates of violence and crime. So I want to pause here for a moment. And Jocelyn is going to be looking at the chat because I can't see it. But I would love it if people would put in the chat if there's anything on this list that stands out to you, if there's anything you think that is missing from this list. Is there anything on this list that you think really resonates with you in Utah and your community here? So just take a minute and type those in. And Jocelyn, if you would just read a couple of those, that'd be great.
You got it. I have someone that said religion.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely. Yeah. With religion, there can be the high levels of trust. Absolutely.
then I have someone that said high trust, low supervision. I am astounded about the lack of supervision.
Okay.
Limited public parks in neighborhoods.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
We also have few activities for children and adolescents stands out for me. I find that boredom itself is a risk factor, not just for sexual abuse, but all kinds of issues.
Absolutely. Yes.
This is a question we can save it towards the end if you'd like, but how about cultural factors, which I believe we'll dive into in a little
Yeah.
bit?
Yeah, we will. Yes.
And then people in positions of trust can misuse the privilege. Few activities for children and adolescents.
Mhm. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I think when we look at this list, we can really say, okay, what do we have in our communities and what are some areas that are high risk and some ways to change some of those infrastructures or patterns. So let's talk about communities in Utah. We have a few more statistics to consider here. So in Utah, 19% of reported child abuse cases include sexual abuse. And that's a 2024 US Department of Health and Human Services statistic. In Utah, 15.5% of surveyed adults reported being sexually abused as a child. And in Utah, 1 in 7 children are sexually abused before age 18. And this is higher than the national average. The CDC average says 1 in 8. And youth under age 18 comprise 25% of sex offense arrests. So I look at this information and this knowledge and understanding of the problem, and the question comes, so what can we do as adults in our community to help lower these statistics? And let's watch a brief video as we explore this question further.
I am an instructional coach, and so I am in more of a leadership capacity in my elementary school, and I work a lot with administration and also with teachers on their professional goals. I've had a really deep passion working with children that suffer, and they will not be successful in school if they have got trauma. My perpetrator had infiltrated and burrowed his way into my life. One of the places that he would show up is at my school. The bus would drop me off. My parents trusted that I was going to school in a safe space, and my perpetrator would park his car there, and if I saw him, I had to go with him, and I felt like I had no choice. He would bring me back when he was done, and I never would say anything, but I learned how to disassociate very well and categorize the abuse, and so I'd just get my schoolwork done because I was obedient. Teachers never asked any questions why I was crying or looked for patterns of irregularity. They never listened to the voice in their head that would say, something's wrong with this child. I spend so much time with data analysis. We look at test scores and how we can teach curriculum better. We are constantly just immersed in this data. Somebody can be the best reader and the best mathematician and with the best teachers out there, but if you've got a child who's broken because of trauma, this whole other part with the data and the test scores, the school grades, really is, I don't want to say completely irrelevant, but it is in some capacity. I see these children who are living in trauma, and I see how it impacts their learning abilities. There's just so many problems that come along with child sexual abuse. It is so detrimental to your self-image, how you carry yourself, experiences that you attract that oftentimes are very negative. Prevention education has to be parallel with everything else that we're teaching in schools, and we have to be very, very aware of what the signs are. It really does take a number of eyes sometimes to be able to see what's going on in a child's life. Teachers absolutely need prevention tools, and it's not just teachers. It is office staff, lunch workers, it's the custodian, it's the principal, it's coaches, it's everybody, it's all hands on deck. Unresolved trauma devastates not just a person and not just a school, but an entire community and nation. It's an epidemic that we must address, and I wish prevention education was there for me as a little girl. I think it would have changed my life.
So I really like that video. because that part about if that had been there, it could have changed my life. And I think that's so important when we talk about education. And so some of the things that we need to know about reducing the risk of child sexual abuse, adults can miss critical opportunities to prevent child sexual abuse because they don't know what to look for or say or do. And so these prevention efforts are effective in stopping child sexual abuse. And by learning the facts, parents can help create safety for children. And I know I said this before, but again, children and adolescents shouldn't have this burden of preventing sexual abuse by themselves. As adults, we have a responsibility. And so that difference can start by learning more about these topics. So let's dive right into the first on the list, perpetrator traits. So as discussed earlier, in most cases, perpetrators are people the child knows. These are family members, neighbors, leaders of youth-serving organizations, teachers, coaches, members of the clergy. They are methodical in earning trust, thus challenging parents' instincts and causing, parents then let their guard down because they're like, oh, I trust this person. And, perpetrators can come across as everyday people, but there are some common characteristics that parents can look out for. So here are some of those. The first one is having charm and charisma. The next one is having access to youth before or after school or in private situations. Being a well-respected pillar in the community or their workplace or school. And then holding positions of authority like coaches or church leaders or teachers. Appearing trustworthy, friendly, good-hearted. And maintaining their public image and standing within the community. And, I look at this list and I think, well, how challenging is it to look at this as perpetrator traits? Because these are all things that in our day-to-day life we look at and say, oh my gosh, this is a person I can trust. Look, they're charming. They are well respected. They've earned positions of authority. They're trustworthy. And so this can be kind of hard to sort of shift your mindset a little bit to look at this. Now, I'm not saying every single person who has these traits is a perpetrator, because that's of course not true. But these are traits that can kind of lull parents into not having, not paying attention, not looking at this kind of critically. So along with these common characteristics, there's specific grooming behaviors that perpetrators use. So we're going to talk about these. Often the grooming process begins with behaviors that build trust with a child and the child's parents or other caregivers with the intent to hurt or abuse the child. And what happens is gradually these subtle actions, they escalate into inappropriate behaviors and or physical contact. In other words, grooming is a subtle, gradual, and escalating process of building trust with a child and their caregivers. And if an adult or an older youth seems overly interested or creates opportunities to be alone with another youth, it is important to be aware and stop that cycle immediately. So we're going to show another video here, and this is one of my favorite ones, to see how one parent responded when she suspected something maybe wasn't quite right.
Oh, hey, honey. How'd you get home? I was gonna come get you.
Oh, Uncle Cody gave me a ride.
Oh, he didn't let me know.
He told me he's gonna get me my own tablet.
That is a very generous gift.
He also told me I'm his favorite.
Hey, I know you're getting too old for hugs, but he's your Uncle Cody.
You look so pretty. Thanks. Do you like my earrings? Uncle Cody got them for me.
Hey, what are you laughing at?
Oh, nothing. Just something Uncle Cody sent me. Yeah. Well, guess what? My uncle said he's gonna buy me my own tablet. I won't have to share with anyone. I'll finally have a little privacy. I gotta go. I'll text you later.
What's going on? I think we need to talk about your Uncle Cody and maybe set some boundaries. Hey, Cody. Do you have a second so we can talk?
So I would love to hear any thoughts that you have on that video by, putting your thoughts in the comments. What red flags stood out to you as possible grooming behaviors? And how would you respond as a parent or caregiver in this scenario? How would you maybe respond as a teacher, a coach, a neighbor, or a family friend? So if you'll put your thoughts in the comments, and then I'll have Jocelyn read some of those. I hate that I can't see them. Sorry.
Someone said gift giving, privacy,
Yeah.
and secrets. Buying a device that a parent may not have access to is a red flag. The lack of communication. Um, let's see, love bombing, saying you're my favorite. He had more interactions with the child than he had with the parent. Let's see, encouraging or forcing physical contact, trying to spend time alone, um, offering a ride, although does seem common. And so I think with that, just already crossing the testing boundaries, I think with the parent is where I interpret from that, and then picking her up without letting mom know.
Yeah.
Someone did say, what would she say to Cody? What would that conversation look like? And then flirty text.
What does anybody think, if you were that mom, or you were working with that mom, how should she respond to Cody, do you think? What are your ideas on that?
I think that it really depends on like the relationship that you already have with Cody and like how you would proceed. If he's kind of an estranged uncle anyway, I would be like, oh, we're not. I would probably interact with my daughter more than Cody. But if I don't know, I think that it would be a uncomfortable way, but there needs to be some very clear boundaries set. And
Yeah.
it matters what the nature of the relationship already is.
And I think that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that out, because if Cody is sort of this very side person, then saying, you know what, this isn't continuing at all, versus if Cody is someone who's very much sort of integrated in their life. But either way, that's a hard conversation for a parent to have, but an important one to say, hey, we need to talk about this.
And then Betsy, I have someone that said, for now, we're going to be the ones giving her rides home. We are also going to be the ones to buy her tech devices. If you want to buy her something, you're welcome to reach out to us first, and we will decide what we feel is best for her. And then the emphasis, once again, of setting boundaries with gifts. The primary relationship should be between parents and Cody instead of primarily through her daughter.
Absolutely. I love that. And yeah, boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. And I know this is a group who knows this well and spends a lot of your lives talking about boundaries. But yeah, saying you go through me, this is an inappropriate relationship between the way he's giving her things and communicating with her, with an adult and a child. Yeah, thank you. Any other ones, Jocelyn?
Let's see. I'm scrolling up. Just being very upfront and honest. It's hard, but the child comes first. Tell him things are uncomfortable, and that communication will go through the parent for the time being. And then lastly, let's see here. I feel that regardless of how close the parents are to him or not, they must have a clear conversation with him and not only the daughter. A good example of how not to put the responsibility solely on the child to protect themselves while still explaining to her what's appropriate or not?
Oh, I love that. Yes, thank you. Yeah, because being aware of grooming patterns and knowing how to intervene on a child's behalf are responsibilities that we all share as adults, because prevention involves adults, parents knowing what to look for, what to say or ask their child, and what to do if they suspect abuse. And we have to act on our commitment to keep children safe by learning to recognize and respond to these inappropriate behaviors around youth before a youth is harmed. So yeah, parents are accountable for understanding the warning signs of sexual abuse as well as these grooming patterns to look out for. So let's go ahead and talk some more about these. Oh, that video always starts again. All right, the first pattern is faking trustworthiness. So this includes pretending to be the child's friend in order to gain their trust, or spending extensive one-on-one time with a child, or singling out one child as, special and showing them lots of attention, which he was doing definitely with her in that video. Faking romantic relationships by providing false feelings of love and affection. Another grooming pattern is testing boundaries with the child, which we were just talking about. So some examples include telling inappropriate jokes, roughhousing, giving back rubs, tickling, initiating sexualized games, so things like pantsing, truth or dare, strip games, etc., and then invading the child's private spaces, such as a bedroom or a bathroom. And then touch is another grooming pattern because touch often begins with regular, mostly comfortable, non-sexual advances, things like hugging, tickling. And then what happens is the perpetrator gradually pushes those boundaries through other forms of contact, things like kissing, snuggling, or having the child sit on their lap. And over time, this behavior can escalate into accidental, I do that with quotes, accidental touch of private parts, and then move on to sexual touching. There we go. Intimidation. This is where the perpetrator will use fear, threat, shame, or guilt to keep a youth from seeking help. And so some examples of this might be, your parents would be so disgusted if they ever found out. Or, I'm going to tell them how much you enjoyed it. I'll send the photos you texted me to everyone you know. No one will ever believe you, and no one will care. And these are things that in my work with adult survivors of child sexual abuse, I hear a lot. And people really carry a lot of shame with this. And that intimidation has so much impact on the child, so much negative impact. And really, whatever intimidation tactic is used, the purpose remains the same, to make the child feel like they can't tell anyone. And there's just so much shame involved with this. Another part of grooming can be sharing sexually explicit materials with the child. So the purpose of this tactic may be to normalize sexual behavior and to capitalize on a youth's natural curiosity about bodies and sex. And so some examples might be sharing self-generated videos or photos with the child and then pressuring them to do the same. So I sent you one, now you send me. Showing the child pornographic websites, texting sexual innuendos or messages to a child, and then using sexual terms freely in the presence of a child. Breaking rules. This is a big one. Perpetrators will purposefully break rules to test a youth's willingness to do the same. And what this does is establishes secret keeping as part of the relationship. And then it can in turn be used as blackmail in the future. So an example of this would be, if you tell anyone about us, I'll tell your parents about the drugs you've been using. They'll be so upset they won't even care about our other secret. And that brings us to drugs and alcohol. Perpetrators will also use drugs and alcohol as an incentive or in exchange for engaging in sexual acts, or as a way to make the child less able to stop the abuse because they're under the influence. And before I worked at Saprea, I spent quite a few years working in substance use disorder treatment with women. And this was something I heard so much when we talked about their substance use history, and how much for so many women it was tied to child sexual abuse. Whether because it started with the perpetrator giving them drugs and alcohol, and then they in turn were using it to get through what was happening with them. And so this can really be a way that is involved with grooming and abuse. Then secret communication, because secrecy is the key to grooming a child for sexual abuse. Groomers will seek out and initiate ways to communicate with the child privately. So oftentimes they'll communicate with a kid online, perhaps through their email, phone, or social media platforms. They may gift the child with a cell phone or another internet device. And these secret gifts not only increase the groomer's access to the child, but also provide more methods to groom via text and calls and photos, which is, I think a lot of everyone in the chat was really picking up on that with Uncle Cody as a grooming pattern and a high-risk behavior. And then blaming the victim. This is a huge one. The adult may kind of ease into this tactic by first blaming the child for something small and testing out how they respond. So, for example, they may test out if the child pushes back or tells an adult rather than taking that blame. And over time, these smaller moments of guilt and shame can progress into threats and intimidation that make the youth feel responsible for the abuse or for what could happen if they ever tell anyone or reach out for help. And then finally, giving gifts. Abusers often give gifts and then expect a repayment, or may make the child feel like they owe them in some way. And that's the, well, I gave you that kind of manipulation and grooming pattern. And I really want to add here that we don't fully know what someone is capable of. So even if an individual in your child's life is exhibiting one or more of the grooming patterns we just covered, it doesn't automatically make them a perpetrator, because accusing every person who shows possible signs of grooming behaviors isn't the most helpful way to respond. And we are going to talk about ways to respond later, but it is helpful to be alert and to be aware of the people your child is spending time with and to raise important questions. So I want you to take another look at the grooming patterns on this slide, because what we're going to do is we're going to read some scenarios and practice identifying grooming behaviors. But first, really quick, would you put in the chat, does anyone think there were any that we forgot here or that you think should be added?
Betsy, someone said compliments.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Really, because all of us want to feel good about ourselves, right? So those compliments can absolutely be a grooming pattern. Good call.
We also have promises.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. For the person who put promises, tell me more about that, please. Wow, I was bossy saying that, right? I'm just throwing out orders. Would you please, if you feel comfortable?
You know, unfortunately, I just watched something about Jeffrey Epstein, which I shouldn't have done because it about killed me. But the main accuser, the original accuser, talked about how she was promised to be to get some help with becoming a massage therapist, and she was very vulnerable and she had a lot of issues, and so she kind of believed some of these. That was just one of the many promises, but a lot of promises were made, and then she felt, like she had to follow through, or she wasn't going to get what she needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you for coming on screen and talking about that, because I think promises are huge. And there are economic realities in this world and things like that. So when people are promising things to to children and youth, that is absolutely a grooming pattern. And yeah, thank you for saying that. Any other thoughts?
Yes, we have, let's see here, attention to those who don't get much attention,
Absolutely. Yes.
knowing hobbies and connecting those specific ways, telling them they are more adult if they participate in inappropriate behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
convincing the child that they can't be believed, unusual interest in things the child loves, saying something like, I want to teach you something important. Sometimes they also groom the parents by getting their trust, isolation, going off the promises, meeting unmet needs,
Mm-hmm.
games like truth or dare, and then putting the child in roles that they should, oh wait, let me scroll back up. Putting the child in roles that they should not be in, such as their love of their life, encouraging kids to fight with their parents or that the parents are too mean. And then we had someone list the grooming stages. So essentially starting in a very subtle way, and then it just grows gradually. Um, and then isolating the child, being too helpful. So there's definitely lots of comments in the chat off of
Oh,
this.
those are all wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. And grooming is not, I think that's a really good point where the person put about parents grooming, that trustworthiness and everything is part of grooming parents too, not just children, which we see a lot. Thank you. Those were all great. All right. So looking at this slide and then also taking into mind all the other good comments that everybody added, we're going to look at a couple scenarios and then pull out the grooming behaviors. So this first one, I will go ahead and read, and you can all read along here. 12-year-old Antonio enjoys participating in the youth program at his church. His volunteer efforts include helping plan service projects, coordinating English classes, and planning youth church events. Antonio often talks to his parents about his church leader, 32-year-old Miguel. Though Miguel is beloved by all the kids and their parents in the church group, he starts paying special attention to Antonio. He drives Antonio home after every church activity. Sometimes they stop to get ice cream, then drive around for a while until the treat is finished. Don't mention this to the other kids or your parents. If they find out I get ice cream for you, they'll know you're my favorite and they'll feel bad. It's our little secret, Miguel says. Miguel begins texting Antonio more often, memes and silly jokes. Recently, Miguel told Antonio he needs his help before and after church to help plan a service project. What about the other kids? Antonio's parents ask him as he starts to become more withdrawn. Are they spending as much time on this project as you are? No, says Antonio, growing defensive. I'm the only one Miguel can trust to get things done. That's why he gave me my own cell phone. When he sees the looks on his parents' faces, he adds, because I have so much responsibility. All right. So going back to this list and then the list of the things in the chat, what grooming patterns can you identify in this scenario? And go ahead and put those in the chat and I'll have Jocelyn read some of them. You're also welcome to come on screen too if you would like to just say it instead of type it. But let's talk about what grooming patterns are we seeing in this scenario.
Betsy, we have special attention, his own cell phone, isolating, buying ice cream, gifts, emphasizing you're special. Let's see, his own cell phone, creating trust with the child, telling him not to tell others, our little secret.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those. This is not actually on my notes, but I'm curious. So I'd love people's thoughts on this. Because you're all spot on this. And again, remember that we give this presentation to parents. This is, community-based. So I know this group has a lot of knowledge on this versus maybe where we might be educating people for the first time in this presentation. But when I'm interested from this group, where we look at the parents asking, what about the other kids? Are they spending as much time on the project as you are? What would your recommendations be for what should the parents be noticing? What do you think would be good steps for the parents to do next?
Talk to the other parents about attention Antonio is giving their child. Start being more involved, maybe going to the activity.
Yeah.
Talk to Miguel about his request. Let the child know that they are there for the child if they need to talk about anything. Limit time he can spend on the project. Talk to Antonio, go to the activity, setting boundaries that Antonio can't give him rides anymore. Someone said contact the church, parents, other involved persons. Take away the cell phone. Talk to the church leadership about the special intention. And then let's see, educate all kiddos from a very young age so it isn't a shocking conversation when and if it does start to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, one of the things is it's hard for parents, right? So let's be realist. Possibly both of Antonio's parents are working, and it's really handy if Miguel's giving him a ride home because they need him to. And so, I think it's so important that we always recognize that there can be a lot of competing things going on for parents, but then supporting them. And as parents look through and say, what are these options? Can we connect with other parents to have them give Antonio the ride home after church activity and things like that? Excellent. Thank you. Okay, we're going to read another one here. So 16-year-old Ava has always had trouble reading social cues. She much prefers to connect with others online or through social media apps. And she likes to take her time to respond in text messages and chats so she doesn't have to face the anxiety of everyone laughing at her when she says something weird or wrong in a public setting. Lately, Ava has been feeling especially lonely since her friend group at school seems to have different interests than those she cares about. And Ava has a few social media apps that help her stay current on pop culture trends. And using the apps, chat groups, and online message boards, Ava connects with others who are interested in culture and media. Last month, another person named Madison commented on one of Ava's social media posts with enthusiasm. Finally, someone with real style sense. These other girls have no clue. Madison seemed especially interested in learning more about Ava's fashion opinions and directly messaged her with some ideas for possible styles. For the next several days, they chat back and forth, exchanging commentary on particular styles. Madison frequently compliments Ava's taste and makes her feel understood in ways her school friends don't. A little later, Madison asks Ava to send a selfie wearing her favorite outfit. I need inspiration for my new art project, Madison pleads. Ava sends her a photo, and Madison quickly replies back with praise. You're so pretty. You have such a great body. How about sending one that shows a little more? It would be perfect for the artistic vision I have in mind. When Ava hesitates, Madison adds, It's just for art, nothing weird. I thought you trusted me. Plus, this is just between us. I won't share it with anyone. So, again, looking at this one, what grooming patterns do you see? Go ahead and put those in the chat or come on the screen and share.
Sorry, I was muted. If it's an artistic vision for fashion, then show more clothes, not less.
I love that.
Someone said aligning with interest, pushing boundaries, with picture requests, secret keeping, asking for pictures.
Yeah. And we have a little note on here that says, although this scenario is increasingly relevant to all youth, it's especially crucial to be aware of youth who may be more vulnerable due to various factors. And these factors include specific cultural or regional backgrounds, gender identity or sexual orientation, being in foster care, neurodivergence, disabilities, or mental health challenges. And so I think that those at-risk groups are really important to look at when we are talking about prevention and also grooming. Okay, so we've talked about grooming, so let's shift a little and talk about physical signs of abuse. And oftentimes kids feel too frightened, embarrassed, or ashamed to seek help, and they may not fully understand that they're in an abusive situation, or they may be worried about how their parents will respond, especially if the abuser is a close family member or friend. And or of course, if it is one of their parents, how the other parent may respond. And these factors are why many child sexual abuse survivors don't disclose before age 18. But even if a child doesn't disclose, there's a variety of signs they may give if they have been abused. And if a parent witnesses a combination of these signs, they should pay close attention and make sure to address them. So let's start with talking about the physical signs of sexual abuse. And so these include difficulty walking or sitting, torn clothing, stained or bloody underwear, sudden weight gain or loss, pain or itching in the genital area, or new marks on the child. And again, I know most people in this group are very familiar with the physical signs of abuse. This is areas you work in, but I just, want you for a moment to kind of put yourself in the seat of maybe a community member hearing this presentation for the first time at your child's elementary school. And these can be really difficult for people to hear about, these physical signs of abuse. People don't want to think about this with children. They want to just say, no, this would never happen. But I think it's important for us to really start talking about this is reality and these are the physical signs, and adults, they need to know. Same with behavioral signs of abuse, things like sudden personality changes, older youths reverting to younger behaviors, an unexplained fear or refusal to be around a certain individual or go to certain activities, sexual reactivity that's inappropriate to the youth's stage of development, self-harming behaviors, things like cutting and self-defeating or high-risk behaviors, and then sleep disturbances, especially nightmares. And again, obviously everybody at the CJC and clinicians are aware of these, and I feel, like I said, a lot like I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but it's important information, and I think it's really good for you to know that this information is included in the Utah State Board of Education approved curriculum so that you know what information is being presented in the community and can support that. So when we look at the effects of child sexual abuse, they are numerous and widespread. It's huge. And many survivors report that they feel their innocence was taken from them. And these effects, among lots of others, we did not have the whole list here, are lifelong and can be quite devastating. And here are just a few examples. Survivors of child sexual abuse are at least 3 times more likely to attempt suicide later in life. They are 40% less likely to graduate high school, 5 times more likely than the general population to be hospitalized for a mental or physical health challenge. Most of you are probably familiar with ACEs and looking at those, the mental and physical health impacts that can be correlated with child sexual abuse. And then 20% more likely to develop an alcohol or drug dependence by age 30. And other effects include an increased risk of experiencing an eating disorder or being victimized by sex trafficking or prostitution. And both male and female survivors are more likely to be victimized by prostitution. So, no matter what vulnerabilities a child experiences, I've said this a bunch of times, but they are never responsible or at fault for being sexually abused. The responsibility lies solely with the perpetrator, never the victim. And I started off this presentation talking a little bit about the focus groups that we did with survivors. And that was another theme that came up a lot, was this sort of blaming the victim. Whether it was parents saying, well, what did you do? What were you wearing? What did you say? How did you act? Those kind of things. Why were you alone with the person? Why were you drinking? All of those things, it doesn't matter because the responsibility lies solely on the perpetrator. But that said, knowledge can be an empowering tool when it comes to protecting children who are more likely to be targeted. So while children and teens of all ages, all races, sexualities, income levels, everything are at risk of being abused, there are unfortunately some vulnerabilities that place a child at higher risk. So taking a look at these risk factors, can read through this, and actually I'm going to read through them just real quick. So we have insecurity, low self-esteem or low self-worth, loneliness, disconnection, lack of social support, lack of information about sex and sexuality, exposure to sexually explicit material, unsupervised access to technology, developmental delay, history of sexual abuse or dating violence, a lack of sense of personal safety, isolation, emotional distress, homelessness or poverty, high level of family dysfunctions, substance abuse, mental health concerns, history of being sexually victimized by family or peers, sexting or a history of being sextorted, disability, so cognitive, physical, emotional.
No, spit it out.
It always makes me smile when children or animals are doing something. Youth who are refugees, immigrants, or runaways, youth who are sexual minorities, LGBTQ+, youth who are racial minorities, and those who are involved in the juvenile justice system, DCFS, or foster care. This is a big, long list. And you know what? Even as I was reading it, this just felt really overwhelming to me. Like, there are so many kiddos in our community that fall into having, one or more of these risk factors. But with these, did anything stand out to you? Were there any risk factors that surprised you? If so, if they stood out or surprised you, will you go ahead and put that in the chat? Or if there's any that you see a lot in your work as a really primary risk factor. And
Yeah,
Jocelyn, if there's any, just throw them out there for me.
you got
Thanks.
it. In poverty, parents want their kids to work and be forced to adult roles prematurely. Risk factor, being a child, attachment issues, poor parental relationships, foster care, DCFS.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, parentified children, that's a risk factor. Absolutely. Yeah.
The lack of sex education is something I notice a lot, especially related to religious and abstinence of only and abstinence only teaching.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just the taboo of sexuality being discussed.
Yeah, I remember years ago working with a kiddo who was talking, maybe like 6 years old or so, was going on and on and on at in childcare about how somebody touched her cookie. And we're all like, all right, tell him not to touch your cookie. And we finally figured out that she had not had, given the appropriate words for genitalia, had not had any sort of appropriate healthy sexuality education. And she was, basically saying someone had touched her privates when she said touching her cookie. But we're all like, yeah, tell the other kids to knock it off. It's your cookie, right? It was, and we didn't understand what was happening. And she was trying so hard to say that she was being sexually abused. But again, that not having any sort of appropriate sex education or, yeah, education about the name of body parts and things like that. So that was a big risk factor. And every one of these risk factors is important to note, but there's a couple I want to dive deeper into. So that fourth bullet point that is exposure to sexually explicit media, this includes videos, music, video games that are violent, sexually explicit or degrading to women, which unfortunately there are a whole lot of video games like that out there. And then the second to last bullet point refers to youth who have a gender identity or sexual orientation that may put them at higher risk. And youth who are LGBTQ plus are nearly 4 times as likely as their peers to experience sexual abuse. And youth who are part of racial minority are notably more vulnerable. The highest rates of reported child sexual abuse in Utah are among Black or African American children at 26%, followed by Indigenous children at 21%, and then Hispanic or Latino children at about 16%. And children who are American Indian or Native Alaskan are also are also at a much higher risk. Now, I say that, and that doesn't mean that, like if a child is white, they're not at risk, or like, oh, this is only a problem that happens to these groups. That's not true at all. And it's not meaning to be disparaging to groups or anything like that, but we need to know the facts and what they are in our community. So this one is especially close to my heart. Let's talk a little bit more about children with disabilities. So sadly, youth with special needs or disabilities are at least, and they say at least because there's varying statistics on this, but at least 3 times more likely to be sexually abused. In Utah, the highest reported rates are among those with a self-care disability. So if you look at the 3rd line down, and an independent living disability, the 4th line down. And these children are about 3 times more likely to experience child sexual abuse than children with no disability, about 30% versus 12.2%, you can see on that bottom line. And if you look at the 2nd and 3rd line from the bottom, around a quarter of children who are blind or deaf report experiencing child sexual abuse versus have a child with no disability at all. And like I said, this is especially close to my heart. My doctorate is in special education, and this is something we do not talk about enough with parents with children who have disabilities and also in our educational circles. And this is just talking about children under the age 18. If we look at sexual trauma across a lifetime of people with disabilities, the numbers rise substantially. Okay, I could go off about this for like the next 10 minutes, but I'll go to the next slide. But this is just so important because we've got to start talking about the risk of children with disabilities. And if we don't give children with disabilities the words to talk about abuse, especially children with communication disabilities, and if they're using things like AAC for communication, PECS cards, things like that, if we don't give them the words, they can't talk about what they're going through. Okay. So up to this point, we spent a lot of time focusing on the problem. And as promised, we also want to spend some time talking about actions you can take to prevent child sexual abuse. And we're going to look at 4 key strategies ultimately in this presentation, which are talk, educate, monitor, and support. But like Karen said earlier, this is like a 2-part thing because it's very long to cover all of the information that needed to be covered. So today we're only going to talk about the first one, talk, but I do really hope you come back to hear the other 3. I believe we said that was in March, but let's start with talk. All right, so you can help reduce the risk of child sexual abuse by fostering a strong, consistent pattern of communication with the children and youth that you care about. You reinforce a sense of safety and belonging when you express genuine interest in listening to your child's, their opinions, their ideas, their interests, their concerns. And you also signal to your child that what they say matters and that you hold confidence in the things they tell you, which can be a critical element should your child experience something that they can't handle by themselves. And when they do come to you with a concern or a crisis, it's important to respond rather than react, which we're going to learn about more in a moment. And responding versus reacting, I'm a parent. I have two kids that are adults now, they're in their 20s, but I've had my share of times where I've reacted instead of responding and had to go back and do some repair on what I did. But I love this video because in this video, we're going to take a situation and the dad's going to handle it two different ways. So let's go ahead and watch this.
Tara, why are you crying? What's wrong?
Nothing.
Well, I can see that you're very upset, so just tell me what happened.
You're just gonna freak out like you always do.
I don't freak out. Just, what's going on?
Okay, well, when you and Mom went to bed last night, some of my friends picked me up and we went to this college party.
Wait, are you serious right now? Are you kidding me? What were you thinking?
Well, it was just this party.
Oh, okay, so a party. So there's probably drinking, guys, drugs. What did you do? Did you do anything? Did you have anything?
Never mind, I knew you would do this. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
No. Tara, this is serious. We're talking about this right now.
Well, you aren't listening
You're
to
gonna tell
me.
me everything that
Stop
happened
yelling
right
at me.
now. Tara, we're gonna talk about it right now. Tara, why are you crying? What's wrong?
Nothing.
Well, I can see that you're very upset, so just tell me what happened.
You're just gonna freak out like you always do.
Hey, I promise I'll just try to listen, all right? So what's up?
Okay, well, last night when you and Mom went to bed, me and my friends, we went to this college party.
Okay, and what happened?
Well, we got there and people were drinking and there was alcohol and people were smoking weed.
Okay.
Well, and we were there and like people kept offering me beer, like a lot, and I kept saying no and it was getting awkward, I don't know, and so I just held a beer in my hand, like I didn't want anyone to ask me about it anymore, so I just held it, but I didn't drink or anything.
Is that
I didn't drink it.
Is that what's upsetting you, or is...
No, not necessarily. Alexis was there with me, and there's this guy, and he just kept hitting on her, and just like he would not leave her alone, and it was just like getting really scary.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay. Take a breath. Can you tell me what else happened?
All right, so what did you notice in that video? What were the differences between how the dad responded versus reacted, and any thoughts you had on that? Go ahead, put it in the chat, or if you want to come on and speak, that's fine too. And I really do appreciate everybody's participation in this.
Curiosity rather than judgment.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I think we all hear curiosity a lot in therapeutic practices, and, let's be curious, but that is so powerful in responding versus reacting. Absolutely.
We have, let's see, body language changes were huge.
Mhm.
I like how he came over to her from the door. Second one, she was open to telling him what happened, which in the first one where he got nothing. Open listening, tone of voice, nearness and support. Took time to listen rather than to rush off to go to work. I felt emotional watching how caring and sweet and non-judgmental the dad was, and that he just stepped in closer instead of talking to her from the door.
Yeah, I love that he takes the time, he gets down on her level, he sits down, and you can see the dad kind of take a breath and he's like, okay, I could freak out about this, but I need to hear what happens. It also sounds like, her friend was at risk, so he's getting this whole story. Yeah, I really like that. But I want to say, again, as I said before, it's hard work to respond versus reacting as a parent sometime. And, sometimes we do better jobs than others with that, but being able to kind of sit down and say, okay, let's try again. So I love that they could just rewind that and show the way to do it correctly. Any other thoughts on that, Jocelyn, or is that?
Yeah, he felt genuine. You could tell that this was hard for him to hear, and he stayed with her and basically just to find out what it was that she really needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's just key is respond instead of react. Oh, there it goes again. So, like I said, we're parents. Some of us are parents. Many of us have children in our lives that are important, and we learn along the way. So, like I said, some conversation's going to push every button we've got, right? Because kids are really good at pushing our buttons. But we're the adults here. And so here's some suggestions that may help give you some space to have the most productive conversations possible. So take a breath. I mean, I'm a therapist, so I am all about the breath. But this gives you that space, that moment to pause, to process what's happening, decide how you need to handle what your child is sharing with you. Like I said before, you could see the dad kind of take a breath and say, okay, we can do this. The next one is pay attention to what you're feeling. Respond with kindness and intention. It's important to not shut the child or youth down when they're trying to communicate. On that first version, he shut her down, started, yelling. She's like, "You always do this," and it was over. Second version, there was that intention, and he checked in with where he was. Third one is listen. Oh, listening can be hard, especially if you'd rather not hear the things that your child is saying or asking. So trying not to interrupt them and let them talk as much as they want before responding is really important. And then validate your child's feelings. Verbally reflect what feelings they think they are communicating by both their verbal and nonverbal cues. And let them know how much you appreciate their trust in you. And then asking open-ended questions. Even if you think you might already know the answers, giving your child space to share more can be very helpful. And as you ask for more information, it shows them that you aren't looking to react prematurely. And then finally, setting or reinforcing expectations. If you are trying to redirect an unhelpful behavior, this is where you set up the parameters or reinforce your guidelines and clearly communicate any expectations. And again, I've said this probably 8 times already, but this being a class, not necessarily for mental health professionals or people working in mental health settings, these may be kind of challenging things for parents to learn and do. Does anybody have any thoughts on, or do you work with parents around this area of respond, not react, and how does that go for you?
I'm waiting for comments, Betsy.
This is where such a nice group of people, someone will take pity on me and make a comment so I don't sit here awkwardly. I know this is a good group. Or has anyone, found respond, not react in their own life that this is
I'm
hard?
sorry. I was going to just say, I didn't mean to add another thing, but I think sometimes, maybe not in this particular scenario, but sometimes for parents, there really are terrible things that their kids say. And,
Yeah.
I'm a parent. We're human.
Oh,
And
yeah.
sometimes we have a reaction because it's terrible or shocking or sad or whatever. And somebody's just saying that the parent should get support for themselves. Absolutely. Because sometimes they say things that are just so terrible and you're, so you're not the adult all the time. Once in a while, you might react. And so I think in a counseling situation, it would be important to validate that parent that this is difficult and help them and support them as well. I think what I liked about that, I'll say this one more thing. I liked about that second, scenario was they obviously had a great relationship and that she felt open enough that she could say something, even though she was afraid. And it was hard to hear, that they had a close relationship. So there's a lot to be done before they tell you something shocking. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
there's work that should be or needs to be in place or can be put in place. But sometimes it's just really hard to hear, and the parent has a problem hearing it.
Yeah. Thank you, Melissa, for saying that because I absolutely agree. And especially when we're working with families that have their own trauma history and there's all these different variables going on, it's hard. And parents are humans too. And yeah, you're right. Sometimes kids say things that are so hard. And so we always, when teaching this, are like, want to really stress that. Respond, not react, but nobody's expecting you to be perfect 24/7 a day because it doesn't work that way. Sometimes these things are really hard.
Betsy, we had a hand up. I don't know if it was Tessa.
It was
Sure.
me. It was a lot. She was actually saying something very similar to what I had an experience where I had a son tell me something really, really difficult. I could tell he wanted to tell me. I sat next to him on the bed, and then I said, let me just preface that I may get a reaction where I may feel like crying or I may not know what to say. And I have to work through my feelings, but I'm responsible for my own feelings and we can work together. And what he told me did bring tears to my eyes. And you're right, we're humans. We're parents. We want the best for our kids. So when they don't make the right choices, um, it's painful.
Absolutely. And I love that you just said all that because you did all the things. You paid attention to what you were feeling and you listened and you validated your child and took accountability for your own reactions and your own feelings. And yeah, but parenting is not for the weak of heart. It is really hard.
Yeah. And I could, because I prefaced that, I was already noticing the feeling was heavy. So I could tell that the emotions were going to be on the surface. And I was able to hug him genuinely. I think because I had started to prep myself with allow yourself to feel everything and tell your child you're going to feel everything. He's allowed to feel everything. And if we have to grieve what has happened and we have to cry, or we just gave ourselves permission in a safe space for both of us to be authentic.
I love that. And I think that is an, amazing example of respond, not react. And you set it up. And that doesn't mean responding is easy and it isn't painful. and hard, but yeah, I love that example. Thank you for sharing that.
Can I add in that the thing that I'm hearing from both Teresa's experience and Melissa's statement is like this piece of like the groundwork is not laid in that moment. And this is even like from your whole entire, your like my big takeaway from today is like this doesn't happen in one conversation. This happens over like the course of parenting, and that it is a long time thing, right? Like the several conversations around like technology and like the grooming that happens there. I mean, that conversation I'm sure has to just happen as a natural part of your engagement with your children.
Thank you for pointing that out, because that's something we really stress at Saprea, and I believe we talk about it in like part 2 of this, but this is not one and done. And I think it's so important for the parents we work with, ourselves as parents, to understand this is that you're right, it is leading up to it. It's all those little conversations along the way that both build trust and educate. Because you sit down and tell your kids something for 4 hours, they're going to be like, I stopped listening to you 5 minutes into this, right? If you dump all the information. So, yeah, thank you. That is a really good point. Okay. So, another part of open communication is teaching your child the differences between secrets and surprises. And sexual abuse thrives in secrecy, and perpetrators will often make children they abuse promise to keep what happened our little secret. And this can really cause confusion to some kids because they've equated secrets with fun things like a birthday party or a surprise trip. And then to help them understand the difference between good secrets and bad secrets, teach your children that some secrets can be harmful and that no one should ask them to keep a secret from you. So if we break it down a little further, a surprise versus a surprise is temporary. It ends in happiness and joy, and it involves something exciting that will happen soon. On the other hand, a secret is seemingly permanent. It's something that makes you feel uncomfortable or nervous or guilty or scared. Secrets threaten harm and make you think you'll be in trouble if you tell anyone. And so it's important to let your child know that if anyone pressures them to keep a secret from you or threatens harm if they tell, that they need to come to you and assure them that they won't get in trouble no matter what the other person said. And I'm going to have Jocelyn drop a handout in the chat right now that talks about how to recognize and respond to sexual abuse, as well as how to make a family safety plan. And we didn't cover all these topics because some of them are going to be addressed in the promise part 2 of this training. But I think it's really important to give the handout now because we're talking about all these things. And I encourage anyone with children to make a safety plan and to determine and discuss what are these boundaries we have in our family? How do we communicate? How do we foster this communication? And if you're here today and you're like a therapist or a peer support provider, I encourage you to use this form to discuss this with your clients. I think it can be a really good jumping off place, and I believe strongly in the power of writing things down and talking about it and having this as kind of a concrete thing to be talking about. So, I have talked to you all for a very long time, and I really appreciate all your listening. I hope that hearing about this as a resource in the community has given you some ideas, or it's something you want to support. So I'm going to turn back over to Karen right now, and she's going to talk about mandatory reporting, some policies, and wrap up our presentation, and then we will do some questions. So Karen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Betsy. I've loved the discussion in the chat and those who've come off mute. So great. Love this so much. We want to end the training portion around mandatory reporting. And I would expect a lot of you are familiar with this already, but in Utah, all adults are legally obligated to report suspected abuse or trafficking, not just teachers or social workers or police or therapists like you. If a parent has reason to believe that a child is or has been the subject of abuse or neglect, or observes a child being subjected to conditions or circumstances that would reasonably result in abuse or neglect, that person shall immediately report the suspected abuse or neglect to the division or to the nearest peace officer or law enforcement agency. There's an added importance for parents and guardians to report as they are in a position of power and trust and have a responsibility to protect their children. The mandatory reporting requirement is described in Utah State Codes sections 53E-6-701 and section 80-2-602. If parents suspect a child is being or has been sexually abused, that person should immediately call Utah's 24-hour child protection line, 1-855-323-3237. This hotline will make it easy to share concerns about a youth with a trained social worker. A person does not need to be too certain of abuse that has occurred in order to call. Feel free to add this number to the final section of the Family Safety Plan. Another hotline you can add to your Family Safety Plan is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 888-373-7888. So take out your cell phones, add these numbers to your cell phones so that they'll be there if you ever need them or can share them with anybody else. And then I also want to just touch on requirements for clergy. When a member of the clergy in the state of Utah receives information about abuse or neglect from any source other than confession of the perpetrator, the member of the clergy is required to report the information, even if the member of the clergy also received information about the abuse or neglect from the confession of the perpetrator. That is Utah Statute 80-2-602 4A. Just finally, I want to share a slide that has all of our social channels. As I mentioned at the top, our resources are available in Spanish, French, and German, as well as English. This particular presentation that we shared with you today is something that if you are interested, this resonates with you, you want to advocate on behalf of parents and children, we can actually train you on how to deliver this content. Jocelyn, who is moderating for us today, oversees all of our community educator training that we provide for free. And you can find that sign up on our website under prevention. And we provide this presentation for free, as well as 4 other classes that you would find really helpful, including the top 5 ways to reduce risk, healthy sexuality, consent. And you can find those classes on our website. Again, these resources are provided free of charge and available in other languages. We have also all of the references to the information that we've cited. We work with lots of other organizations in the community and are just really grateful for the opportunity to share with you today. And now we'll just open it up for Q&A. I know there were a lot of questions in the chat that we maybe didn't answer with the information, but this is an opportunity to come off mute or drop in the chat questions.
Karen, I have one off the slide that we just covered. If we can explain why clergy is exempt from reporting abuse if the perpetrator says it. Just some confusion behind that.
Yeah, I think we're all confused about that. Unfortunately, that's the state statute, that's law. So if we want to change that statute, we can lobby our representatives. But unfortunately, at this time, that is state law. If I remember right earlier, there were some questions around our slide about high poverty being a risk factor. Betsy, do you want to speak to that from the slide? There's confusion about this crosses all socioeconomic lines, but one of the risk factors we did cite was high poverty.
Yeah, I think, and again, child sexual abuse crosses all socioeconomic lines. But you are right, higher poverty can put you at higher risk. There's some reasons for that. That may be less parental supervision because parents are working, higher risks of areas where people live in that may not be as safe. There's less supervision, less access to high quality clubs and things like that. So it's another risk that can go along with poverty, unfortunately.
Okay, and then can you clarify that although it is, sorry, let's see here. Let's see, can you clarify that although it is a clergy confession is protected information, this does not mean it is illegal for a clergy to report, correct? They wouldn't be charged legally. They still have a personal choice to make.
Right. So, if the member of the clergy, they are protected against like a civil or legal lawsuit if they choose to report what they heard in under a confessional situation, but they do not have to. But if they do, they're protected legally for doing so. But they're also protected legally if they do not. Unless, of course, they hear about abuse or neglect from a source other than the confession, then they are legally required to report the information.
Thanks, Betsy.
I feel like I'm talking in circles there. It's a bit convoluted. So call me out if I say something wrong. Am I trying to say it, Karen?
I think Heather just added a great clarification. Do you want to share that, Jocelyn?
Yeah, recent Utah legislation, HB 432 in 2024 created legal protections for clergy who choose to report abuse learned in confession, allowing them to do so without fear of civil and/or criminal liability or violating their faith's rules, even if the church policy is to keep it confidential. They are advised to call the church's legal representation.
So that's what you were saying, Betsy.
But that was said so much better. I believe you said Heather said that. Thank you, Heather. You said that a lot better
I
than
just copied and pasted. I can't take full credit.
I totally give you full credit. It was beautiful.
And we do have one more question. We've talked about abuse. Can you direct me to the education to those on the part of the spectrum about neglect? There is a situation in my neighborhood that may be neglect and how to respond.
I'm not sure will you read that again? I'm sorry, Jocelyn. I want to make sure I respond correctly.
Of course, we've talked about abuse. Can you direct to me to education to those on the other part of the spectrum about neglect?
Oh, so we're talking, okay, so I heard spectrum and I was thinking autism spectrum and children with disabilities, but are you talking about neglect? We have sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect. Is that what you're asking? Because neglect is also a child protection services response.
Yes, neglect.
Okay, yeah. Then neglect is absolutely a report to CPS. That is just the same as physical abuse or sexual abuse. It's a child at risk and mandatory reporter.
And that can even just be encompassed in a well check.
Mm-hmm.
You can call and request a well check. If you're seeing children unsupervised at length, scrounging in the garbage food, like whatever the situation, you can request a well check.
Thanks, Karen.
I have a question. Is it okay if I ask it rather than type it in the chat?
Of course.
Oh, thank you. Great information so far today. Thank you for all that you've shared. I always get stuck with mandatory reporting. If it's an adult telling us about abuse they experienced as a child, we don't necessarily need to report that, right? Unless the person that abused them still has access to vulnerable populations, and then in that case we do report it.
Correct, because your 40-year-old telling you about something that happened, 30 years ago, there's not a child at that moment at risk. So, but yes, if that person is having access and they have reason to believe that that person could be still harming other children, then yes, report.
Okay. And then I wonder if you can clarify this too. So let's say it was a family member that abused them, similar in age. Let's say like an 8-year-old was abused by like a 9-year-old or something. Now that 8-year-old is an adult and is my client, and their cousin or whomever it was. They don't have access to children in a professional sense. They're not a teacher or anything like that, but they have children of their own now. Would that be a report or no?
Only if you had reason to suspect these children were being harmed. So the fact that someone acted out sexually at 10 does not make necessarily, it could, but necessarily make them at, 35 or whatever with their children at risk. But if your client is telling you, and I've seen these things that, I think my nieces and nephews are at risk, then that would be reportable. Does that make sense? These are such hard questions. I always say err on the side of reporting if you're really struggling. Always touch base with peer support or your supervisor and kind of talk through. I always find it really helpful to talk through with, here at my work at Saprea, I have other clinicians that I sit down with and I say, okay, let's figure this out because there's so many variables to look at.
Okay, yes, thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Betsy, there's another question, Jocelyn, I'm going to bring up about grooming. The comment is your presentation was excellent. It seems like it was geared towards adults grooming, but didn't address children/teens grooming other children/teens, which you mentioned was 40 to 50% of cases. Can you speak to what that would look like? I think one of our scenarios addressed that, but can you speak to that, Betsy?
And you know what? I think that is interesting because it's an area that we are going to have more research on, I think, in society as we talk more about this, as we become more aware of peer-to-peer or child-on-child sexual abuse. But I think some of that grooming can, and again, we're depending on different ages, but some of that grooming of, well, we're in a relationship and I care about you, and those sort of patterns you can see a lot in that. The same kind of things, no one will believe you. Everyone will, they'll all know you were doing drugs or they'll all know you sent me a picture. I think the things people were talking about, flattery, all of those apply with children as well and child on child. But I think this is a really interesting area. And again, I said Saprea is going to be spending quite a good portion of our time in 2026 of really digging into these and releasing some white papers and things like that on the topic, because I think there is a lot to be learned about child on child, and we need to start talking about it.
Mhm. Are there any questions that we have missed that someone maybe dropped earlier in the presentation? I want to make sure we cover those as well.
There was one. Let me find it. I said we would
I was
answer.
trying to catch them as they were coming in.
Oh, you're good. Let's see here.
If anyone had a question earlier on and you put it in the chat, please come off mute and share with us so we can get it answered. There was a question about the videos that we shared in the presentation today. We'll try to make sure, and Heather, maybe you can help us with the follow-up email that can have links to the videos that we shared today.
And then we had one ask, what are the percentages of the abusers? And if we have those racial percentages as well?
I don't.
And then what is the percentage? It's the one where we listed the percentages for minorities, but do we have one for white children?
Did we have that chart, Betsy, that slide?
Well, I'm looking.
I couldn't find the racial breakdown, but I know we have it.
I know we have it too, and it doesn't seem to be in this presentation.
But we can include that in the follow-up email.
Yeah, we can include that for sure. Yeah, this is the disability chart.
The percentage for the white children is lower than the racial examples that we shared, but we can get you the exact percentage.
Yeah.
And then we have one, let's see. Is there a statute of limitations on reporting in Utah?
I believe we no longer have it in Utah, but
Heather, can you confirm that?
yeah, I'm going to ask this. I'm going to turn to CJC here.
I actually don't know. Let me find out. Or if anyone in the chat knows. I think for reporting, no.
I remember reading that the statute of limitations, that the change happened, I believe, in March 2015, I think it was. I know it was around about the time of the Browns. Remember the Browns and their father? And I remember reading up about that in the newspaper, and it was around March 2015. But I stand corrected if someone has more accurate information.
I believe it is also, we do not have it anymore. I get sometimes jumbled up in my heads between states because at Saprea, we have our retreat, our 4-day retreat, and people often talk about this, but people come from all over the country and the world. And so I am so sorry I get that kind of confused in my head sometimes, but I believe that Utah, that you are correct, we no longer have that statute of limitations, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like there's none for victims of child sexual abuse.
Someone did ask for all of our contact information. I just dropped all of our emails in the chat. Jocelyn is our global outreach strategist. She does a lot of work in Utah. I oversee our partnerships, events, healing intake, and language. And then I included Betsy's as well. She's our chief clinical officer.
And just because, I have all these people listening to me and this platform, besides prevention at Saprea, we also have healing resources. And so I encourage you to take a look at those. We've been doing healing retreats in Utah that are free. Like Karen said before, we've been doing them for the past 10 and a half years. We've served well over 6,000 women. And they come for 4 days. They're psychoeducational in nature. If you go to our website, you can look at our research outcomes on them. And if you're a clinician and you happen to be working with adult survivors, this can be a really great thing to augment their healing journey. And we also have an online healing webinar that's 3 hours that survivors can come to as well. So I really encourage you to go to our website and check out both our healing and our prevention sides, because I never miss an opportunity to talk about that too. So thank you for indulging me.
With that, Heather, I think we're done. We again are so grateful for the opportunity to be here today and share about all of the information, and hopefully it was beneficial to your audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Gabby will be putting the evaluation link in the chat. Oh, there it is. So that is available. Make sure that you save that link before you leave. We'll hang out for a little bit so that you can have time to grab that link, and make sure that you submit it by 5 p.m. Friday. And we are so grateful for you guys today. It seemed like everybody really enjoyed this presentation. We're looking forward to the March presentation. There was so much great participation from everybody, great questions and comments in the chat. So that speaks volumes to your presentation as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Question, I don't know if we have time or if I could maybe contact someone later.
We're happy to stay on for, we still have time.
I have a client at 11 or in 5 minutes. So yeah, I don't need long. I'm wondering about a situation I learned of recently where a 60-year-old remembered that her older brother had abused her when they were kids, and he was like a preteen, and she only remembers once. She said it could have been more, but she suppressed it until the last like 2 years. Um, so the perpetrator, we've been talking back and forth, and she doesn't think like she feels like she can see changes in him and doesn't think he's necessarily at all like abusing his grandchildren who live with him in the basement. What I'm wondering about is the next step of telling the rest of the family and what's appropriate. My instinct, and after talking to another therapist and consulting about this, is that the next step is to talk to this grandfather patriarch. Um, Probably have one of his sons talk to him because he's a very patriarchal person and say, hey, like we recently learned about abuse that happened from you towards a younger sibling and not even naming her. And we don't want to keep secrets in the family. We don't think so ill of you or anything like that. We want to make sure like this is a family that doesn't keep secrets. And we do need to tell the rest of the family that has children, right? But we wanted to give you the chance to tell them first. I don't know, something like that. I feel like it's a hard situation.
Oh, you are not even kidding that it's a hard situation. And I think, I love the fact that you're talking with other, clinicians, getting that peer support, talking through this. And I think it's, obviously ultimately up to your client of what does she feel is safe for her in her healing journey and what will make her feel empowered of, if there's any chance of this ever going, still going on, we're going to stop this. This is not going to be this big family secret. And I think it's just, I'm so glad she's in therapy and making sure she's well resourced and everything to do this. And in therapy, talking, okay, how are we going to handle all the different outcomes? Because there's a lot of different outcomes that could happen. And certainly you don't want her to be blindsided by that when, because there's a chance he'll completely deny it.
Right.
And so, yeah, I am really glad she's in therapy. But I do think the directions you're exploring with her are completely valid.
Okay. And I think there's just this family, like working with some other people in the family, I feel like there is a risk of just that culture of like we do something bad and we keep it secret. That there's another client in the family who has had a divorce from like pornography addiction. And not that that's the biggest thing, but it came out that he had exposed himself to one of his siblings growing up. And the family kind of just doesn't really talk about it, it seems like. So not even that the client has all this passion to say something. It's almost me that I'm like, how can we like carefully just influence the culture where we don't keep secrets, but we're not blaming and just saying everything to everybody all the time, but how to go about this to almost let the perpetrator know, like, we know what happened. We don't blame you. Like, we want there to be no secrets and we want people who have children to know that this is something that happened. Um, we totally think you've changed. We want to give you the chance to tell them. And if you don't want to do that, we think they do need to be told. It's information that they need to know. Does that seem
Yeah,
like a good way to go about it? Or
I just think it's so hard because I think as clinicians, we can look at and say, wow, this would be really good for this family. But again, it's that what does the client feel safe doing and just making sure, you're really balancing what she wants to do for her healing journey and what you can see as the greater good to stop this with the family. I absolutely agree that interfamilial abuse is awful. A interesting resource for your client would also be Generation All. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but their website, generationall.org, talks a lot about stopping the intergenerational kind of patterns and transmissions of abuse. And so some of that going to their website might normalize some of this for her of saying, these are ways we can stop that. And in full disclosure, I'm on their board. I should probably say that. But yeah, this is a hard one, and obviously a family with some really entrenched issues that I agree are not okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And good luck. That's hard work.
I got a
Betsy,
quick question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I recently had a teenage client confess to me that she knew of a friend who was having sexual relations with an adult, so teenager with an adult. So as a mandated reporter, I then reported to police officers, but I was also curious if I should do that with like CPS, or if it's better to do it with law enforcement, or both. I wasn't sure when I was trying to figure out who to report to. I ultimately did law enforcement, but was just curious about that.
In theory, you can report to law enforcement or child protection services.
Heather, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, they are required to cross-report to each other. So there is, if you're needing to call law enforcement, they would be cross-reporting to Child Protective Services and vice versa. So it depends on the situation. Oftentimes, if there's like an urgent, immediate need to address safety, then calling law enforcement, might be able to get that immediate police response. Otherwise, calling Child Protective Services for something that may not need that urgent response. But either way, they're cross-reporting. So,
okay, well, thank you. And I do have one more question as well. I was curious, do you guys, so if you have a situation where there's two children that are the same age, around like 6 or 7 years old, and they, begin kind of like experimenting with like kissing, and then playing further, it goes further and then ends up being more like sexual acts. Do you categorize that as sexual abuse, or I'm just curious how that is categorized.
And that's such a hard one. This is where we get into such nuances, because some of this could be curiosity. It could be both of them saw things on TV and they're like, oh, we're trying it out. My suggestion always on that is, that's a situation, put those kids in therapy and, have that explored. And also,
yes.
I mean, coming from a therapist, put them in therapy. But I do think that's the case, because it could be pretty harmless. I mean, and look at the age and developmental stage. It also could be indicative of something else, but that's where, you're drawing boundaries and saying, what are we going to do? But calling that child on child, it could be, it could not be. That's within sort of the further exploration, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Take care.
It's Rachel. I have a question. If you know what the percentage is from those cases that get reported, that get followed through with actual criminal charges, jail time, prison, like any follow through. I know it's a very small number, but do we know what that is?
I do not have that statistic. I don't know that. So you're asking of how many are charged, are then found guilty and given incarceration?
Yeah, because usually isn't the burden of proof is, having the evidence, but
Heather, do you have any insight into that?
I'm so sorry. I was responding to something. What was the question?
It looks like somebody responded with about 24% go through the court system. The question is, of those who are, there's allegations against, how many of them actually go to court and judicial actions taken.
Oh, well, that was my boss that responded, so she would definitely know.
Perfect.
Great job, then, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Okay. I think what a great audience today. Just so many great questions, such great discussion. Um, Heather, anything from you?
No, just thank you again. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we're looking forward to your next presentation.
Great. We'll get you those
Thank you.
links for a follow-up email, and we're just, again, really appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I just stay a little bit so people can get that link.
Should we stop recording?